In Search of the Source, Chapter 3, Before the Beginning. I wonder if I can really do this. That was the question I had the first day when I sat down and seriously addressed the project I was about to begin. I was in the Bible house. That's what the men called the little office we'd built across the path from the main house. It was still early morning, and I was the only one there. The view of rugged, tree-laden mountains is majestic when clear, but now the only view was a wall of gray fog, and with it came the chill. How long had this been coming? All through college, I dreamed of working in a place like this. It seemed ideal. I liked outdoor activities, and this was outdoor living at its root. I liked mountain climbing, and now we were in the midst of mountains. I liked building things out of wood, and here I'd built not only our house, but even all the furniture that was in it. I'd always liked people, and there was certainly no shortage here, all very gregarious and social. To add to that, I'd had a growing love for studying the Bible, for getting to the bottom of what it's really saying, and relating its message to the events of everyday life. But now that I was here, could I do it? Could I really accomplish what I'd been planning and dreaming and praying and talking about for so long? After attending Biola College, I went to Eastern Washington University. I'd always thought I should be a missionary. At least, I could never think of any reason why I shouldn't. I was a Christian. I was able. There was no work to be done for the Lord out in the world. There was work to be done for the Lord out in the world, and I figured if anybody ever asked me why I didn't join in such a cause, I would not have a good answer. During my time at the university, that idea became more refined and focused into a vision of becoming a Bible translator. I met Carol during these days. She was going to Seattle Pacific University and was following a similar leading to mine. So, we joined ourselves together in marriage. We took the course at Summer Institute of Linguistics. It was pretty grueling. That means, a lot of work. But we made it through and applied for membership with Wycliffe Bible Translators. As part of that, we were exposed to cross-cultural living and jungle survival training in Mexico, as well as the rest of our orientation and preparation. Once accepted by Wycliffe, we began speaking in churches, telling our plans. We were going to serve the Lord somewhere at the end of the earth. We'd see where. Then we found out. Through coincidences here and there, Papua New Guinea kept rising up and staring us in the face. 500 languages, they said, and most of them still unwritten. And those were all separate languages, not dialects, so they weren't related to each other. Since then, the number has climbed to over 800 as more extensive language surveys have been taken. Can you imagine that many languages in one small country? We started investigating, asking people who'd been there. We talked to other translators. Some said it was a beautiful place with beautiful people. Some said life could be hard. Both proved to be true. It took us about a year and a half to get ready to go, getting our financing together and getting our gear. Heather, our oldest child, was 5 when we left, and Dan, almost 2. The other 2, Bruce and Wendy, were yet to be born in Papua New Guinea. Getting settled in this tropical country wasn't without trauma. First, we set up house in Ukurumpa. It's centrally located in the highlands and provides a place for language workers to stay when they're not in the villages. It's a comfortable enough place. Support staff live there year-round. We were just getting into learning Melanesian pidgin, that's a language, the lingua franca, used by a broad cross-section of the people who otherwise don't share a common language, when Carol got sick. Actually, sick is hardly the word. She almost died. That's when I really wondered if we'd make it. Carol had been weakening for some time, but we didn't know what it was. Then one morning a friend came to visit. Alarmed by Carol's appearance, she contacted the only medical expert around at the time, David Lithgow. He had been a doctor but wasn't functioning as one then, having gone into Bible translation. He examined Carol and told us we needed to get to a hospital. Fast. She had some boils, some small boils under her arms, and they weren't healing, nor was there any pus. This day, though, the whole area was turning black as coal. Ugh. We left our kids with some good friends in Ukurampa and tried to get a plane. They were all out. She couldn't go in a helicopter as she needed to lie flat. Finally, we took a Datsun station wagon in which she could lie diagonally, and we drove the 2 hours of dirt road to Goroka. All the way, I was feeding her chips of ice for the sores that were forming in her mouth and swelling at a rapid rate. Carol held on until we got to the hospital. Then, as soon as the doctor came into the room, she lapsed into a coma. That means where you're alive but completely unresponsive. At that point, nobody knew whether she was going to live or die. I was beside myself. Her white corpuscle count had slipped to 600. It's supposed to be 5,000 to 10,000. It was apparent to the medical staff that she was suffering from septicemia. Her bone marrow was simply no longer producing white corpuscles. Without those, any small infection could not be countered, and it takes over. That's why the boils had flourished and gangrene set in, killing off that part of the body. In the end, we learned that she had been allergic to Comaquin, a malaria preventative that was used at the time. It's since been generally replaced because of its risk to some people like Carol. In the meantime, I had nothing to do but pray. People back at Ukurampa were praying. We had wired the states, and people were praying. Later, we found that people all over the world were praying as one would contact another. The coma continued day after day. Every day, I would come to the hospital longing for news, but there was no news. There was no medical way to cause bone marrow to begin producing white corpuscles again once it had stopped. Every day they would take a blood count, and it would be the same. There was nothing to do but wait by her bedside, talking to her, playing music, praying. As the days went by, she turned completely yellow. Then, one day there was a change. A lab technician who had been watching the count came running down the hall with the news. "It's up to 800!" He was as excited as I was. Then the next day it was at more. Finally, at the end of a week, she began to come out of the coma, slowly and incoherently, like out of a dream. When she came clear, she wondered what the terrible stench was. I had to tell her. It was her own dead flesh. The gangrene was still there. After that, she stayed in the hospital 3 months. The gangrene had to be surgically removed and the area packed with bandages. Eventually, they took skin grafts from the tops of her legs to patch up the big holes that were left. Oh, that would be awful. There were multiple visits to follow, lasting a number of weeks at a time for the reconstructive surgery under her arms. Even after that, she couldn't raise her arms over her head, and had to have physiotherapy for months to get back her full movement. The recuperation took over a year. We were grateful for the medical team of Papua New Guinean doctors and nurses who worked on Carol and put her back together, not to mention the scores of pints of blood donated by Papua New Guineans. It's interesting to note that since then, Carol has been unusually resistant to the kinds of diseases expatriates pick up in Papua New Guinea. We've wondered if some of the immunization came from the native blood that she received. Do you understand that?
Yeah.
So she had to have blood given to her because of how much her body had been going through, and because of all the surgeries and procedures. She received blood that had been donated from people in that country. Oftentimes when people travel from a more civilized, especially to a less civilized country, they'll get sick a lot.
Mm-hmm.
But because Carol got all that blood, her body picked up, what's that word? She picked up immunization from the blood of people who had already dealt with those sicknesses, and their blood cells had already learned how to fight off those sicknesses, so she didn't have to do that as much. What had mystified all the doctors who knew about the case was how Carol's bone marrow started producing white corpuscles again. Corpuscles.
White?
That is a weird word. I don't know, maybe that means white blood cells. This book is kind of old, so some of the words are a little bit different.
It is white blood cells.
White blood cells? You know that word?
I don't know the actual word, but in the context being used, if they fight off infections and stuff, then they're definitely white blood cells.
Yeah. Well, this book is like 25 years old, 26 years old. For that, we can only give God the credit and say it had to be a direct result of our prayers and the prayers of God's people holding us up. In the end, the head doctor told us it must have been a miracle. We'll accept that. We do know it was a hard test for us, an early obstacle to get doing what we came here to do. When Carol got well enough to start caring for the family again, I began studying survey maps for the area where I thought we might go. So they had already been there for over a year at this point, delayed what they thought they were going to be doing. Alex Vincent, a veteran field linguist from Australia, had accompanied me as we walked all over a particular area of rugged highlands I'd seen once from the air. We were 10 days on that trip, along with a Falopa interpreter I'd happened to meet in the city while caring for Carol. We'd sought permission from the government, as well as the national church that was working in the area, and both were happy about our plans to possibly settle around there. So were the local people of the various villages. Alex and I talked with them, accepted their hospitality, and found out as much as we could about the situation. The place we chose was Fukuteo, a hamlet of 350 Falopa people. Not only did it seem right to us, but there was a strong desire on the part of those people to have us settle among them. I remember how the final meeting among the elders of Fukuteo was both climactic and not. At such meetings, everyone who has anything to say gets his turn, with the older and wiser ones generally waiting to speak after those younger. Though I didn't know the language, and certainly couldn't follow the fine points of dialogue, I could see that the considered opinion was highly favorable for our coming. The most prestigious one among the elders, Awarape Ali, a fight chief and staunch representative of the old ways, spoke at the very last. He still had questions. He could not fathom that anyone would want to come out here and live with them. There was nothing to attract. I explained again how we wanted to live among them, to learn their language and their ways, and eventually translate the Bible so that they could know the Lord and his word for themselves. All this was still incredulous to him, and in the end he just snorted and walked away, not really committing himself at all. I never knew what to make of it, but later others told me that it was God who had brought us. The Falopa are a group of 2,500 people. That's not very many people. They are native Malaysians living in a particularly rugged area of the interior highlands. Their contact with anyone from the outside was comparatively late. Until about 1960, no white skin dared enter their territory, having heard tales of murder and cannibalism. By the time we came along in 1972, the Australian government had established a system of law and order, and there was already a church there. The church had been established by an evangelist named Kira Pareke. He was actually a Falopa by birth, but his village was destroyed when he was a child. He escaped with his family to a village in another language group, Sambarigi. This village had a missionary, and he heard the gospel and became a Christian. Later, he became an evangelist and eventually went back into the Falopa area. He was the one who first introduced Falopa to Christ. He lived with them for a while and taught them. Before he left, Kira Pareke told them to pray for a missionary to someday come to them. He assured them that God would hear their prayer. They prayed, and that, they said, was what had brought us. And that was why Awarape Ali had been powerless to speak against it. Without sharing the same language, however, it was difficult for the Falopa to get a grip on the message of the gospel. It looked like it was within reach, but it was actually just out of reach. There was a great deal of confusion. On a second trip with Alex Vincent, we started building a house, and a great many Falopa men pitched in with zeal. We brought in a few things from the outside, but mainly we built it out of native materials. Tree poles for the studs and beams, bark and split palm for the siding, sago palm leaves for the roof. By the time Carol and the children came, the structure was up and most of the floor was in, but there was still no water. The windows weren't finished either, which gave the villagers a good chance to find out who Carol was and observe our strange lifestyle. Our family all shared the same house, had no fire pit on the floor, slept in beds, and the children slept apart from their mother. These were just a few things they found most curious about us. As we settled, we got to know the people and worked at learning what we could of their language. The Falopa language is no easy one, full of sounds and mouth contortions native English speakers never make. It is full of nasalizations and glottal fricatives that come out sounding like a catch in the back of the throat. It is something of a tone language, where two words spelled exactly the same will have altogether different meanings, depending on whether they are said in a high pitch or a low pitch. Do you guys understand any of that? Yeah. So think about the sounds that we have in our language. We have 26 letters in our alphabet, but do we only have 26 sounds? No, because some of our letters make different sounds, right? Like our phonemes. A can say a, ah, right? And what about letters that go together like ch, sh, sh, sh? But do we have a sound that says Do we have sounds that uses our nose like No. So that would be very different, learning a language with a lot of those different things. What if the word yes meant different than yes? I don't really know how to give a good example, but words that are pronounced the same way, but they're said in a different tone of voice and they mean two different things.
Like there's a language where you can say it in 6 different ways and they'll all mean a different thing.
Yeah.
Mom could be ghost or horse.
Yep, it would be very tricky. Of course, there were no books on the language, and it was by our investigations we learned that it had 14 vowels and 14 consonants. Do you know how many vowels we have in English?
5 or 6.
A, E, I, O, U, and sometimes Y. So 5 or 6. We had to devise an alphabet. Besides having different sounds, the grammar is different than we're used to in English. Verbs, for example, come at the end of a sentence or a clause. Sentence subjects are often merely implied, and the listener must figure out by the context who is doing what. So, if we're using English and we're going to say, the girl sits in the chair, where's the subject?
Girl.
Where's the verb?
Sits.
Yeah. So they might say, I don't know. So they might not say the subject. They might not have the girl in there. They might just say, sitting in a chair.
She said.
Yeah, but I don't think they would even have a pronoun to take the place of a noun because that would still be the subject. And the verb goes at the end, so somehow the word sits is going to be at the end of the sentence. It's
Chair
tricky.
Sits she.
I don't think they would have she. So it would be totally tricky to learn that different way of speaking and writing. It's common, for example, for someone to say, went to work, felled large trees, lopped branches, cleared brush, made fence, returned to village. And you just better know who's being talked about because no more hints will be given. We gained friends, and with that, the necessary trust, without which we would be able to do nothing. Like everyone else, we needed water, and it was a long haul with buckets or gourds from the spring. They had never liked that either, so together we devised a plan for a pipeline. I was able to get a mile of plastic pipe and bring it from the coast. They dug the ditch, and before long we had a gravity flow operation from a spring. Everybody was involved, and everybody benefited. We also did quite a bit of medical work. Not that we always knew what we were doing, but there was so much suffering we had to do something. Through radio contact with the doctor at Ukurampa, rifling through health books and having an introduction to such in our field training, we learned as we went. We gave injections for pneumonia, treated seriously infected cuts and sores, tropical ulcers, malaria, and intestinal parasites. Later, a volunteer dentist taught me to pull teeth, and I've done a lot of that over the years. Carol and I were involved in all this together. Besides her normal responsibilities of wife and mother, she had the added responsibility of teaching our children while we were in the village, using a correspondence course from the elementary school in Ukurampa. And she also helped out with language data gathering, kept up the dictionary file, did all the typing, learned the language, and helped me a great deal with pronunciation nuances I wasn't hearing. Besides that, she did more than a half of the medical work. We never knew what was going to happen next, or what to do when it did, but we trusted the Lord, our wits, and experts back at Ukurampa, whom we could contact by radio. Not long after we first arrived, Kira was asked by a desperate mother to treat a 3-year-old child who had rolled into a fire pit in the night. The fire had been out, but under the cooling ash, embers were still hot, and a large area of the child's side and back was burned. The area had become infected and was covered with pus and flies, by the time the parent brought the child to Carol for help. It was a gruesome situation, but Carol gave herself to the child. After 3 weeks of intensive care, continually treating the infection, the child began to recover. Through these experiences, our relationships with the people continued to deepen. Of course, our children were very popular among the people, and it helped break down adult inhibitions and barriers. Heather went native. She insisted on dressing like a falopa and wanted only a string bag and doll for toys. From the time she first learned to read and write, she liked to gather a group of girls and sometimes even grown women together and hand out paper, pencils, crayons, and books. She proceeded to teach them. Though her efforts were childish, many times she did not even know enough herself to teach them proper writing. Many of them did go on to read and write. Dan, on the other hand, was very shy and wouldn't even venture to the front of the house for many weeks after we moved there. He played with some small cars on the floor and each day moved a little closer to the front door until he would finally play with a couple of the children. Little by little, he broadened his play area and circle of friends. Eventually, he spent hours and even overnights in the bush on bird hunting trips with his friends. We had been there on and off for about 2 years when we received a radio message from Ukurampa that a workshop was going to be held. We were to attend along with a Falopa speaker and bring 10 chapters of the first draft trial translation ready to be checked. This was an SIL requirement of all new translation teams in the country. It would be taught by seasoned translators and consultants. I'd known this day was coming, but it still took me by surprise. I didn't feel at all ready. That's when everything went foggy for me, and the chill came on. Until then, everything had been go. There had been years of schooling, the training, and telling everyone back home of our commitment to do all this. There was the moving across the world, the settling, the almost killing sickness, the humiliation of starting again in first grade, and learning everything in a new culture. But now the real test was here. Didn't they know that for all our apparent good beginnings, I could hardly put 2 clauses together? This was too early. I wasn't ready, and I just wasn't sure I could really ever do it at all. Out there in the Bible house in the morning, I prayed, Lord, I just don't know how to do this. The one who spoke so confidently before must have been somebody else, some other Neil Anderson. This one is weak. Lord, I said, I need help. I can't do this by myself. Will you help me? Will you tell me that you're going to help me? Is there some place in your word where you say you will? Show me where it is, Lord. I need a word from you. The gray mist was still hanging low over the house and over my head, but out there above it, I knew the sun was burning bright and warm. In time, I would penetrate the fog. In time, it would penetrate and the fog would lift. I opened my Bible and began to read. After that, I started every morning in the same way, praying, searching the word for a word. I read through several books of the New Testament until one morning I came to a verse at the end of Hebrews. It lifted me straight out of my chair. It was Hebrews 13, 20 and 21. May the God of peace, who through the blood of the eternal covenant brought back from the dead our Lord Jesus, that great shepherd of the sheep, equip you with everything good for doing his will, and may he work in us what is pleasing to him, through Jesus Christ, to whom be the glory forever and ever. Amen. Amen was right. I had found the word I'd been needing. Equip. The Lord was promising to equip me. The whole passage qualified. Bible translation was a good thing. I knew that, and I had no doubt that our doing it was His will. He had gotten us this far, and now here was the promise that He would equip me for what I would need to do next. Gripping those verses like the oars of a lifeboat, I found Hapele and Isa, who had been coming to the Bible house and teaching me language each day, and told them the time had come to start translating. Such an announcement was a highly significant thing for me, but they just said, fine. I was almost surprised at how there was no apprehension on their part, but then it's nice when you know a language from birth. On the first day when we got into it, we started the session with prayer. In that prayer, I claimed those same verses, Hebrews 13, 20 and 21, as my rock of faith. I reminded the Lord of His promise that He would equip us with everything good for doing His will. After that, every day when we'd start to work, we'd always include that verse in our prayers. With that, and with full confidence on one side of the table, and more than slight trepidation on the other, we forged ahead into our first work. Genesis, the book of beginnings. Somehow it seemed appropriate.